Melody Moore is a social entrepreneur, a licensed clinical psychologist, a yoga teacher, an author, and a speaker. She is the founder and president of Embody Love Movement, a nonprofit whose mission is to empower girls and women to celebrate their inner beauty, commit to kindness, and contribute to meaningful change in the world. Dr. Moore teaches yoga and embodied expression workshops and trainings internationally. Her work has been featured in the books Yoga and Body Image and Yoga and Eating Disorders, Ancient Healing for Modern Illness. She created the collegiate Body Image 3D program for Delta 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 and is their subject matter expert on self-love and body acceptance. Melody Moore serves as a faculty member for Off the Mat Into the World, a social profit that empowers leaders to become conscious activists. She is the National Eating Disorder Association's advice columnist, a founding member of the Yoga and Body Image Coalition, and an advisor at World Muse. Since 2006, in her private practice, she has spent over 15,000 clinical hours specializing in recovery of eating disorders and the restoration of self-acceptance through integrated treatment of psychotherapy, yoga, and meditation. Please join me in welcoming Melody Moore. Welcome, Melody. It's great to see you.
Thank you. You too, Sarahjoy. I'm happy to be here with you.
Thanks for making the time. I know we were just visiting before I pressed record, and we both come from busy times and high commitments and passion, and I really appreciate our mutual integrity for the work we're doing in the world.
Same here. Thank you. Yeah, the work you're doing is incredible. I love especially hearing about your work with inmates.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I wonder if we could start today by hearing actually about the Embody Love Movement that you started, including what was the seed in your own life that sort of grew into this particular kind of service for you? And what do you know about how that seed got planted in your life, both before you knew it was there, and then how did you nourish it going forward?
That's a really wonderful question and way of putting it. I feel like there were a few seeds, a few paths that intersected that allowed for Embody Love Movement to come to fruition, or for those seeds to be nourished enough that I could even recognize them within me. One, just beginning with my own negative body image. I grew up in a family where I was born into the world feeling like I wasn't enough because of my gender. My dad sincerely longed for a boy and was so disappointed that his third child and last child was a girl that I feel like energetically I came into the world already with a sense of not enough-ness and as a disappointment. So that wound was there, which I think is the seed of a seed. And then as a woman whose mother was struggling with an eating disorder and whose sister struggled with an eating disorder, well, as a girl, not a woman yet, and growing up in our culture, as you know, where so many messages are sent to us and to me that my value and my worth was based on how I looked, that next wounding was there, that illusion that I'm not enough unless I look a particular way, weigh a particular amount. Also not true. Mm-hmm. And then coming out as gay in a family where the fundamentalist Christian belief was that is a sin and I would go to hell if that were the case, and it is. Mm-hmm. There was a third wounding, and I feel like so grateful for each of those circumstances being part of my journey, because without any of them being true, I don't know if the seed of how to create healing, how to create recovery, and how to create integration for each of those things within me would have been there that allowed for me to be the one that got the privilege to begin Embody Love Movement. So I know that's taking us pretty far back, but it was like through seeking healing, really, before I even knew that that's what I was doing, through seeking healing through the path of yoga, and of course through the path of therapy, that I came to realize my own body image, my own self-image, my own sense of value, my own sense of being part of the mind of God and of divine wasn't available to me until I found a yoga practice and an embodied practice and a way to get out of my head about these things and into my body. And so as a clinical psychologist, to jump way ahead, I realized that if it's working for me, the likelihood is it's also going to work for my clients and those with whom I get to work who have similar struggles. Similar sense of not enoughness and acting out through food in whatever ways. The range of eating disorders was the thing that I was working against at the time. And so Embody Love Movement came from how can I help to foster a way of preventing more girls from developing negative body image, negative self-image from the beginning, and a way of preventing relapse for those who have already been through this struggle and are committed to standing for a world where all of us value who we are and therefore value each other for the souls and not the bodies that are carrying those souls. So I was inspired by my own healing. I was inspired by a group of clients I had worked with over years who really were living in recovery, which can sometimes for folks struggling with disordered eating and negative body image seem like an illusion, like an impossibility, but it isn't. And I got to know that it wasn't from this particular group of young women who I offered the first Embody Love Movement, it wasn't even called that yet, workshop for. And they said what I hoped that they would. This is something that we could learn how to facilitate. This is something you could teach us, and we could then take it back to our junior highs and to our college campuses and to yoga studios. We could teach this. And I knew that if they were empowered to do so, the likelihood of them slipping back into illusions of not enoughness and of body hatred would be minimized. And it has been. And so it really started out of first my own wounding, then my own healing, then my capacity to be in that privileged position of holding space for others who were doing the hard work of healing too.
Yeah. And since I've known you for a few years now, we've had a couple of other conversations and you've done some teaching where I was a student. I have a little inside information about this, but I want to ask you on behalf of our listeners, what did it sound like in your head when your body image issues were high? Just to normalize for them that other people have thoughts and like body checking habits. How would somebody know if they had a body image issue? And yeah, just to say what you might about that.
For me, it was the energy I used in negative self-evaluation about my body. Mm-hmm. I had an illusion that other people, when they interfaced with me for the first time or ever after that their opinion of me and their approval of me was based on how I looked externally. And so it made me so worried about how far is my stomach protruding today away from my spine, I guess. How much cellulite do I have? If I eat this particular thing, is it going to make me fat? And if I'm fat, is it going to make me disgusting to other people? Will no one be attracted to me because of this? Will I not get chosen by this particular friend group because of the way that I look? So I spent time like in college, literally in the closet, not the proverbial closet, the literal closet, in a ball with my head down, just crying like I can't go out to this party because I'm not going to be no one's going to find me attractive or good enough based on what I perceived as being too fat. So I had several big, mean internal critics. You're disgusting, you're gross, you're too fat. And because of that, you're worthless, you don't have value. You don't have meaning, you have nothing to offer. So the energy it took up in my life was severe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sometimes like to remind my students, it's heavily preoccupying, often not true. And it does take energy that we don't actually have to spend.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As hard as it is to stop it, or as real as the thoughts seem to be, and as motivating and seductive as they sound, they aren't actually now helping us, even though they once started as like helpers, as protective mechanisms. They're no longer as helpful as they once were, because now we're getting preoccupied and not living life as it's available. And it's also tiresome to keep those thoughts at bay or to keep chattering with them when they're voluminous.
Absolutely. But I agree with you. In the beginning, the development of these thoughts, it's almost like a protection.
Yeah.
It's a navigating through whatever emotional experiences were overwhelming. At least that was true for me. I didn't know that at the time. It was unconscious to me. But when life didn't feel yet like it was coming at me to heal me, like it feels now, and now I can see situations that aren't going my way, whatever that is, as teachers. But back then it felt so different, and I had no access to my internal experience to recognize sensation as teacher, to recognize emotions as things that I could welcome, that could inform me. And so I think any time I felt uncomfortable, which was most of the time, it became a pathway toward this I can resolve. As miserable as it was to feel fat, gross, disgusting, ugly, It was easier than feeling maybe overwhelmed and insecure and anxious and everything else that was going on that I didn't have an ability to believe that I could tolerate and contain.
Yeah, and it seems like elusively, seductively, sneakily true that you could do something about this moment is having this difficult thought like I'm disgusting or I'm too fat, and that actually by thinking it I'm going to somehow make this moment more bearable, and I'm going to find the plan to fix what's wrong with me so that in future moments I won't ever have to experience this kind of discomfort again, except that the discomfort isn't actually coming from the thought. The discomfort happens before the thought. Then the thought tries to explain the discomfort, and then we're in what yoga calls memory and fantasy. Yeah. So does it actually go away? A lot of my students ask me this question, so I'm going to ask you. It widens the feeling of confidence and optimism.
Yes.
Does it go away that we aren't waking up in the morning and first thing checking the stomach, or the thoughts aren't so preoccupying, and maybe do they fade altogether, and do they get transformed into more positive or joyful thoughts about your body?
Yes. A resounding yes. Yes to all of that. And I don't want to make it sound simple because I think it can be discouraging. Like, just come on, flip the switch, and this is going to be really easy. It just makes it'll go away immediately. For me, it has been a practice and a commitment. That commitment has turned into devotion. So at first, something that takes discipline over time and practice for me has turned to devotion. So it doesn't feel complicated anymore. But this, I'm talking about 20 years of effort.
Yeah.
Of effort. So yes, I think one of the things that begins to happen is through meditation practice. And yoga asana can be meditative until we can learn to sit. That took me a while to sit in meditation. We have that diffusion of mind and thought, so that even if a thought were to arise, a negative body image thought or a critical or comparative thought, there's a space between the thought itself and mind or observing ego, the part of me that is eternal or that is true. And so there's this way of holding out, maybe that's a potential. I could go down that rabbit hole in that path and act into it if I believe it fully. Or I could notice, like, interesting, what's that about today that I would have a negative body image thought? That's been a while. What could be going on? And I don't have to allow that thought to be a wave over me that I'm sucked into and driven by. I can instead hold it out and then go, I wonder, typically when I have a negative body image thought, something's happening in my heart or in my psyche that maybe feels overwhelming to me. And let me look at how am I today and just check in with me instead of diving into that thought automatically without really any access to another alternative. And I think that's one of the benefits of this practice is the space and the pause and the deep breath, so that we can be in inquiry about these thoughts when they come up instead of in an automatic relationship to them that's so discouraging and overwhelming.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And one thing comes to mind that I want to share for our Hunger, Hope, and Healing community, because you're talking about a tool that we use, and another question comes to mind. So I'll talk about the tool first. It's called getting in the gap. And the gap means getting into that like slice of, even if it's like a tiny millisecond of a millisecond, but the slice between thought and reaction to thought, or impulse and action, getting into that gap between those two things. And getting in the gap also stands for getting grounded. So the question is, what do we put our attention on in the present moment that can be grounding because it's real and tangible? Like the feeling of the hips on the chair, or the feet on the ground, or the air on the skin. And then A stands for paying attention. So getting grounded, then paying attention, paying attention, paying attention, repeating attention until attention becomes presence. Where we're then in that thing you called like the witness that's watching. We're in the part of us that when we're present, we aren't lost in judgment, and we're not lost in past, and we're not trying to solve the future. We're present to the love that can come through us even on our own behalf. And this takes practice because the mind is easily hijacked by its own shenanigans. So the question that comes to mind based on what you were saying there is, you made note that sometimes a thought comes, and because you're able to have like the fork in the road, you're able to say, I wonder why I'm having this thought emerge.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like it's not about your body that the thought's emerging. Something might be happening in life or in your emotions or your mood. And this thought comes up as kind of a blip on your radar screen. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because I've noticed in my lifetime, my body image, I would say, has gone from a zero of I absolutely abhor the way that I look and have had really negative, that's putting it mildly, thoughts about my body, to a 10 of I recognize that I'm part of the divine.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize the namaste in myself and each other. I recognize that I get the privilege of this healthy, strong body in which to walk in the world. Because I've had 0, I've had a lot of time in between, and I've had 10, if I want to put it on that scale. I have literally within my entire life, adult life, weighed about the same thing. About the same thing. I don't get on the scale. But this is great evidence for me because I know I can look exactly this way and feel amazing about myself and terrible about myself.
Mm-hmm.
That gives me evidence that this negative body image thought very unlikely is about my body. It's very unlikely. Because yesterday I looked the same as I look today, and yesterday might have felt fine. Or typically for me, it's nothing about my body. It's kind of it's not something I spend much time thinking about. Mm-hmm. So if it's coming up, then I do know I have that evidence already that this isn't about the way that I look. It can't possibly be. I looked the same yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. So instead, as a point of entry, it's curiosity, and I think the other wing of that has to be compassion. Mm-hmm. Not even starting with the negative evaluation or judgment or criticism of why is this thought there, just like really like why? Yeah. Well, what's coming up for me that I'm not aware of that's getting displaced onto my body? Mm-hmm. So beginning with compassionate curiosity. Mm-hmm. Helps to inform me where to begin to look, not to look in the mirror or to look at my body in self-evaluation, but to begin to look internally as to what might be going on that I don't feel like I have within my sphere of influence, and how can I open my heart to invite that in with concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've said something there that I want to give a little on-ramp to a question I'm honored to ask you. So when you're talking right now, what I would surmise if I was your yoga therapist, which is a role that I play for some of my clients and not a role that I play for you, but to use our real-time conversation as an example, you're experiencing enough safety in relationship to your thoughts and your body and your life that you can tolerate having the thought emerge without it capsizing you. And we like to say in the work that we do here that there are 3 primary needs based on being a human organism. The first is safety. Mm-hmm. The second is connection. We can't survive without it. And the third is we call adventure, or the spiritual journey. And when I hear you talk about this thought can come up and you're able not to be capsized, I think, oh, Melody feels safe enough in her body, her life, her mind, her heart. You also must feel connected or resourced enough to tolerate the thought without getting hijacked. And then you seem to have enough fortitude inside for the adventure or the question with curious compassion and genuine inquiry, not just, why am I having this thought? Kind of like a self-critical or self-berating sentence, but really, why am I having this emerge today? Mm-hmm. So we have to have enough safety and connection to tolerate the adventure. We call that part of that adventure in Hunger, Hope, and Healing, we call getting comfortable, feeling uncomfortable. Like we're just safe enough, we're just connected enough. We don't have to be profoundly at ease, and we have just enough resource to ask the question, why is this happening for me like this today? Mm-hmm. But no berating or criticism. Yeah. So we say safety, and then adventure comes from the feeling of safety. But if connection is in there, then connection boosts the courage for the adventure. Yeah.
And I love that word adventure here. Like, what a wonderful use of that word, because it's an exploration into the unknown, which, I hear you, it does feel frightening to get away from what we have known as being comfortable, but that's avidya. That's not knowing, right, where we're going. It's necessary to step into those places that feel scary, whether it's scary in our internal world or scary toward connection with other people, if that's something that we're unfamiliar with. It's so necessary because belonging is there, possibility is there, or presence is there.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit, Melody, then about the mutual interest we have in attachment theory? And can you talk a little bit about how when safety isn't there, we seek it until we have a sense of it, even if it looks like a derivation of safety? When connection isn't ideal, we still have to land on connection somewhere to resource ourselves enough to be well enough to get to a point in the journey where we can have the adventure of recovering. And I'd be honored if you go back to even just like, what is attachment and why do we need it? And we're talking to a yoga community and a psychotherapy community. So we're using attachment as a word, a descriptor, and a system of thought, not attachment from the yoga community that says non-attachment. Right. So just to clarify.
I know, it gets really complicated when we think about, okay, not raga, not that attachment.
Yeah.
But attachment in the psychotherapy community is used to help us understand the way in which we draw in connection with others or are fearful of it or withdraw from it. Mm-hmm. And attachment is a model, really, that begins in all of our lives, in our infancy, maybe even before birth. But if we think about infancy through the development of toddlerhood, there's this really wonderful time for each of us to potentially develop a sense of safety with our primary caregiver, oftentimes mama, but could be grandma, foster parents, whomever is there that the child's really relying on for their well-being, and for their needs to be met and for their sense of safety. And as an infant, really life. So these are true feelings and fears as infants. So if we are parented by, lucky enough to be parented by folks or a person who's able to meet our needs, who's able to meet our needs for physical presence, who's able to meet our needs for hunger and satiety, who's able to meet our needs for soothing, then we develop a sense of I can trust. And that allows us to trust also ourselves. And when we're met instead by parents who, for whatever reason, despite their best effort, their level of awareness and their level of capacity was not available for us to feel safe, for us to feel like there is an anchor, there is a safe haven, there is somewhere I can put my needs and they will be met, we tend to develop an attachment disorder or a way of perceiving the capacity to connect to somebody else. It's just not safe. So some of us become anxious, we become clingy, we become overly dependent, we outsource our needs for self-soothing to other people because we didn't develop it within ourselves. It wasn't given to us, so there was no buildup of how to do that within ourselves. Others of us may become avoidant out of fear. These needs were met for me and you definitely won't meet them, and so I'm going to isolate and withdraw and be avoidant instead of be able to move toward connection with other people. So it's these first primary relationships that develop a kind of attachment style for each of us. This happens very, very early on. And then we unknowingly, most often unconsciously, carry that attachment style toward, it's like a template within us, within our personality and our mind and body. And we carry it into adulthood and we carry it into adult relationships as we're meeting people, as we're forming relationship or unable to form relationship. Very often it's based way back on how early life went for us. And there is hope here too. I love that hope is part of Hunger, Hope, and Healing.
Thank you.
Because for me, I feel like I had an attachment disorder. And through years of therapy, years of yoga, meditation, all the practices, Svadhyaya, I no longer feel that way at all. And I feel like I've also had the privilege of helping other clients heal through attachment disorder into wholeness and into a capacity to trust and to connect deeply with others and have intimacy and have a sense of belonging and of safety within self. So sometimes it's hard to talk about it because people look back and go, oh no, I'm doomed. Like then there's no way for me to be in healthy connection. That's not the case. It's just going to probably require some work to get there.
How does yoga become a source of secure attachment for people? Like the practice of yoga. What might you say about that?
One of the things that has offered for me the asana practice, the physical practice of yoga, is an experience of my body that I can continue to breathe through despite the discomfort.
Yeah.
I don't mean pain. I don't mean find your edge, practice at the level of over effort,
Right.
but something like perhaps a hip opener or a shoulder opener for some of us provides a level of there's a sensation there. How can I keep breathing through the level of sensation? Notice that as my breath expands around the sensation dissipates. That practice, without jumping into my head and wondering about what I'm going to do later, or how mad I am with this teacher for holding me in this position for so long, or fidgeting around and looking at my fingernails, instead of really just, I'm going to continue to breathe and hold the pose, any pose, but I'm using a hip opener as an example here. That allows the practice on the mat to inform my life off the mat. Because when I can begin to do that on a yoga mat, keep breathing, stay with, invite in, notice, I can use the wave Kripalu method, right? Breathe, relax, feel, watch, allow. Oh, this has changed. I've been here for 3 minutes and everything's changed. The sensation moved from here to here to here to here, and then it sort of opened up, fizzled away. Now I'm back in my breath. That allows me in my life to have the same kind of capacity in an interaction with someone. If something registers within my psyche or within my brain that's reactive, can I breathe? Can I stay with it? Can I notice what's happening in my body? Can I get a sense of the texture of the sensation and the color and recognize it without having to do anything but stay in the gap, right? Stay grounded, stay in my breath, and stay curious as to what's going on. So the practice on the mat informs the practice of living in a way that allows me to stay. So for me, if my attachment disorder is up, my reactivity is up, one of the things that used to happen for me is if I'm in relationship and the person, and this could be a friend, it could be a partner, is leaving, either leaving due to like a breakup or divorce or just ending of a work relationship or something like that, my annihilatory anxiety would come up of, oh no, my abandonment fear would come up, instead of seeing, I'm okay. I have a capacity to self-soothe. Everything is exactly as it needs to be. I have an ability to shift the way I'm perceiving the situation. I used to get overwhelmed in that feeling and not really be able to have access even to thinking, because the sensation would be bigger than anything else. Yoga's offered me a way of being able to sit in that gap and see, like, oh, you may be leaving for now. You may be leaving for a trip. You may be dying. You may be divorcing me, and I can still be okay. I can still access the resources within me that allow me to keep breathing through this moment and notice this too. Teacher, this too can be included. This too is part of my growth. Instead of feeling as though the situation is something that is going to take me down entirely.
I used to talk a lot to myself in such ways as I felt like I was self-condemning, self-abandoning, self-condescending, self-criticizing, all of those things. And one of the primary things that I talk with my students about is when we're doing what you're explaining there, expressing how you can stay with it, you can stay with it, you can stay with it, is that we start making the capacity for and the commitment to not be a source of self-abandonment for any reason, not to self-abandon and not to self-condemn and not to self-flagellate and not to self-criticize, because those things actually aren't helpful anyway. They don't produce a learnable brain state or a curious heart or mind. So for that purpose, not doing it, but also because when we self-abandon, when we self-condemn or self-condescend, we become a source of fear about our need for secure attachment. We replicate the disasters that we felt earlier in life, where we could be abandoned for a moment or more and feel like it was going to be forever, or that was it about some shameful, hateful thing about us that this person was abandoning us. Even if from the outside lens, from the movie of our life, that person was actually just going to the grocery store. That the terror inside, there's such a significant body memory that's pushing that up to the surface. If we then condemn it or abandon it, we make deeper the attachment wounds that we've had. So we make this commitment not to be the source of abandoning or condemning ourselves. Now, it occurs to me that some of our students or listeners, they might not recognize that they have an attachment issue because it's not explicit in their life just yet. And sometimes that's because the way they're eating or exercising or managing their anxiety, it hasn't had a chance to surface yet.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that to be the case with some clients where they think, I had good parents, I had a good circumstance, I'm cohesive, I'm relatively stable. I just have this one issue with compulsive eating in the dark at night by myself while the TV's on.
It's nothing to do with anything else.
What might you say?
We don't know. We have no idea what we don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, and that was true for me too. I had no idea I had an attachment disorder. I just had all kinds of symptoms everywhere, all over the place, right? Like you're saying. Yeah, we cannot heal what we don't acknowledge. And so I would say part of our commitment as yogis is to be in the practice of svadhyaya, to do the inner work, to look within, and to get, again, compassionately curious about why these symptoms won't be there, why this overeating in the dark at midnight, or not being able to eat in front of people, or refusing food, period, why that could be coming up, how that could serve as something protective for you. I'm always alerted when people say to me, when clients say to me, my childhood was great, my parents were awesome. I'm like, oh no, not that parents aren't awesome and not that childhoods aren't great, but for most of us, and thankfully so, it's way more complicated than that. It's way more complex than that. My parents were awesome too. I adore my parents. Mm-hmm. And things happened to me as a child that should never happen to a child. Mm-hmm. There's a way that we can hold both. My friend Nikki Myers talks about the power of that word "and." Yeah. How can we both understand my parents did the best they could with the resources they had available and the level of awareness that they had available. The way that they were able to meet my needs, however, was not always every single time available in the way that I needed. That's, I think, true for most human beings on the planet to different degrees. So it doesn't mean we are blaming or shaming our parents to be able to honor that there were times when we needed something and it wasn't there. We should also be grateful for that, because if our parents were there every single time we needed something from them, we wouldn't have had a chance to develop delayed gratification. Yeah. Always told yes and always met right at the time of a need, we wouldn't really be able to learn to begin to self-soothe. We'd also miss the part of it where it's adventure. Yeah. Like we wouldn't have the chance to grow and to feel the adventure of creativity if our needs just keep getting met, and we don't get to find out what's my adventure going to be. So there has to be a rhythm. We say this in our yoga therapy trainings here. There has to be a rhythm of like safety and connection, some rupture, and then some repair, relationship, and then again a little rupture might happen and repair. And that's actually, it's happening at a very musculoskeletal level too in yoga asana, that muscle fibers get stretched and then they repair, and that this is kind of like the pulsation of life that's going on. But for many of us, relationship doesn't feel yet safe and connected enough, so rupture feels terrifying. Or we had mostly, like in my life, we had mostly rupture, not mostly repair. In my childhood, it was mostly rupture, and then sometimes relationship, but there wasn't explicit repair. So I didn't learn the skill of self-repair. And when I would rupture my relationship with myself, which was like make an agreement not to overeat, compulsively eat, binge eat that thing, walk that way where the bakery is, or not to walk into Emac and Bolio's again, which is an ice cream shop in Boston. When I made those commitments and I couldn't do it, I was rupturing my relationship with myself. And there was no repairing it. It just had to escalate into very painful behavior again and again. Repair started to happen when I found yoga and meditation, or when it found me, which blessedly it did in a way. It was a very spontaneous occurrence when that happened. Yeah. And then I felt like, wow, I could relate to this world that's like outside of my own skin. There's much more going on out here. I could have a relationship with this, and maybe I'm worth repairing. Maybe I have just like an ounce of value, and I'm worth repairing my relationship to. Can you talk a little bit about relationship rupture and repair it is a cycle that we discuss in neuroscience and interpersonal neurobiology? Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. And one of the things I'm hearing in your expression is just how powerful shame is.
Yeah.
Once we start in that self-demoralization and in that self-rupture, and critical self-evaluation, that shame is it's there. It's almost like it's addictive and creates more and more and more of the same behavior instead of any kind of window or leap out. We're just shutting down and closing the doors to opportunity to do anything differently from here when that's our attitude. And I can identify with that. So I think you said so many important things there about rupture and repair, that we do have to cultivate, I think, for a lot of us, the capacity for repair. And what does that look like? What does it look like to start to inhabit a sense of integrity within ourselves, that we can repair when we've broken our own trust, when we've said we're going to do something and then do something else, when our speech doesn't line up with our feeling, when we're being dishonest, or when our thinking doesn't line up with our action and we're just out of integrity with ourselves. I think one of the things that begins to help us course correct and come into more alignment and come into more integrity so that we have greater access to self-repair is knowing what our values are. Is really having a sense of, if I want to be in alignment and I want all these things, this thinking, doing, saying, and feeling to be congruent with what? What's important to me? And this is individual. This gets to be individual. What is the most important thing to me, or what things do I really value and prioritize? For some of us, if we have absolutely no idea, we have this path as yogis, yamas and niyamas, these ethical principles and precepts. Okay. All right, great. Thank you for telling me. Ahimsa. Okay, good. Now I know. I'm gonna value non-harm. I'm gonna value not harming myself. Well, once I really start to consider that, not harming myself is inclusive of not believing negative body image thoughts. Not harming myself is inclusive of not feeding myself in a way that causes me physical pain or psychological distress. So then how can I begin to align my thinking and my saying and my doing with these principles? That's helpful to me, because it creates a sense and a source of repair. Will we get it wrong? Yes, because we're human, because we have some skara, because these patterns are really old. So then there's going to be another rupture. But we keep, I say it in 12-step program, we keep coming back, we keep coming back to, these are the principles that I'm a commitment to being in integrity with.
Yeah, it reminds me of the third phase of recovery that I talk about in Hunger, Hope, and Healing, which is forgiveness, self-forgiveness, and freedom. Like, the forgiveness leads to freedom, because now we have the freedom to become who we could be when we're not being condemned by ourselves. But also forgiveness, there's several steps to forgiveness in the work that I teach, but I want to give you a chance to talk about forgiveness from your perspective. But the thing I would say there is, forgiveness changes my biochemistry enough that I feel more free of the habitual thought of shame, and then safe enough, connected enough that the adventure, the possibility of forgiving myself, actually led to freedom. And I'm just curious what role you would say to your students or clients. What role does forgiveness play?
I think forgiveness is everything. I think it's everything. I've been studying this year the workbook of a book called A Course in Miracles. One of the lines from that book that just lights me up is, you can have a grievance, and you can have a miracle, but you can't have both. Right. So that when we're in shame or resentment toward ourselves and not in the practice of forgiveness, we are necessarily living in the past. We are bound up in that prison, and there's not any way of being fully present in the now when that's the case. We cannot be two places at once. It's one of the gifts of the breath, because we're always breathing in present time. We can't offer a breath to yesterday, right? It's like we're always breathing in present time. A yoga teacher of mine a long time ago, Lisa Coyle, said, every exhale is an opportunity to forgive. I really love that, because every exhale allows this like opportunity for an inhale, which is the right now. I feel like when we are holding ourselves in blame, in shame, in resentment for any way that we've treated ourselves, or that we've treated other people, or that other people have treated us, it works the same way. we're attacking ourselves. That is not ahimsa. That is not compassionate. And we're imprisoning ourselves to back there. So we're on the hook.
Yeah.
Still in relationship with the then. And to the extent, because time and energy and effort, these are all limited resources. To the extent that we're back there, again, we're just not here.
Yeah.
We don't have an availability to be inside the potential of the now, and the power in the now, and the possibility of the right now. And that's why, for me, forgiveness is everything. All the powers in the here, all our capacity, our sphere of influence, all right here. There's actually absolutely nothing I can do to impact the choice I made earlier today, or 10 years ago, or whenever. But if I can not bring that burden into this moment, then I have a space in this moment to have choice.
Yeah. And again, I'm just struck by, well, we're having this conversation, we're our present day selves, and our historical selves would probably have found this conversation astonishing. I mean, mine would have. So I'm struck again by the reflection that in our lives today, there's enough safety, enough connection, enough interest in the adventure. We have enough resource. We have a certain amount of privilege. We're not hijacked by basic survival needs right now, that we can have this sort of warm, robust, multifaceted exploration of what's happening. And somebody else listening might find this exciting, enticing, and also terrifying. That forgiveness is something they may have thought of happens once they're at that body weight, or after they stop binging, or after they stop purging, or once they burn enough calories, or they kind of, if they ate this many calories, they have to burn this many or more. That forgiveness might seem mathematical or economic in a way. And I wonder what we might say is like, what could be like a beginner's step to consider forgiveness? And sometimes I say the possibility of forgiveness.
Right.
Or the possibility of the possibility of the possibility of self-forgiveness.
I love that. I love how the teacher Jack Kornfield talks about setting our heart in the direction of forgiveness. Setting the compass of our heart in the direction of forgiveness, that it can begin as an intention. If it feels like such a lofty ideal, it can begin as an intention. And I have found for me that when I can't seem to tolerate or access forgiveness for myself in the present moment, it's normally out of this idea that I know better. How could I have done that? I know better. I have a meal plan. How could I have done that? I know better. Of course I know better. I know almost everything, right? Of course we know better. We've been told. And we have to recognize, though, that knowing and accessing resource are two completely separate things. And forgiveness and condoning a behavior are two completely separate things. Forgiveness is simply an allowance of drawing ourselves back into the present moment. It's not condoning. It's not saying I agree with that behavior. It's simply saying I'm not going to allow the fact that I chose that behavior to dictate how I feel about myself or how I feel about this moment now, since it's over. So starting with not identifying with the choices that we make or that were made on our behalf. That we aren't those decisions, we aren't those mistakes, we aren't those choices. We have a soul that's eternal, and an essence that we're carrying with us into this moment. And so if we can just begin to unhinge the way we self-identify from behavior toward soul, toward something more eternal, more meaningful. I think that's it can be a bit of a start of just like a deep detangling and a welcoming into the possibility, the turning our heart in the direction or the intentionality of forgiveness. And another thing that has helped me is trying to see that sometimes when I'm making decisions that are self-sabotaging, I am acting from an unmet need of my infant or an unmet need of my 2-year-old. And even though I'm 40 years old, I'm like a Russian doll. And I have these little parts of me inside of me still. And oftentimes when a reaction is hysterical, it's because it's historical. It's older. And so if I can identify that there is a wounded little baby Melody inside that drove the choice toward the addictive behavior, toward the binge, helps me to honor her by doing inner child work, bringing that little part of me in and saying to her, I see that you feel overwhelmed. I see that you need soothing. I see that you're anxious, and you went toward the bowl of ice cream out of that longing to be soothed right now. I can take care of that need for you. So we don't have to do that right now. Yes, you did it yesterday, but right now I'm going to hold you inside of that and let you know that you're okay, you're safe, things you were speaking to earlier.
Yeah. And then you become a source of secure attachment for yourself, just to bring that full circle. You become a non-abandoning, consistent, cohesive, loving presence for yourself and for your many selves in your Russian dolls. Yeah. I call that the inner community. We all have an inner community that we've internalized, and some of our parts we like better than other parts. Right. They all need our love and care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's integrity, right? Being able to own and recognize and acknowledge all of those parts, the ones that are easy to love and accept, and the ones that are more difficult for us. Because when we try to deny that piece of us, or those parts of us, they get bigger. Yeah. They get more. Our shadow increases, and then they have more capacity to get in the way. Instead, if we can sit back and go, that's part of me too. That's part of me too. That need, that desire, that personality trait, that shadow piece. I'm all of that, which is the complexity of being a human.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to talk about with the shadow, and in all the settings that I talk about it in, I was mostly babysat by the TV as a kid. So were my sister and brother. That's how we got by, was with TV. We didn't have parents at home as much as we ought to have. So we saw a lot of cartoons. And one of my favorite analogies for the shadow is to see, like, this is based on how shame feels huge sometimes. So if you had like this tiny creature in the cartoon, maybe like a little mouse wearing a feathered hat, somehow they have these hats on their heads, and the mouse is kind of tiny, but the way the light is shining on the mouse, it has this huge shadow on the wall behind it. Yeah. And the other cartoon character sees the shadow of the creature and is terrified that it's like this enormous, scary ogre. But actually it's just like a little mouse wearing a feathered hat going from one mouse hole to the other mouse hole. He's not doing that much. Yeah. But the perception of how big that shadow is huge, and it tends to turn people away from doing shadow work, because what if it's that big and that scary? Forgetting that some of what's held in the shadow is also what is precious and lovable and innocent, and which couldn't express itself if environments didn't allow for that to happen. So I try to make shadow work seem like something, well, not just seem like, because it actually is something of the adventure. We're safe enough, we're connected enough, and what we kind of reintegrate from the shadow could be parts of us that are not scary, but actually very nourishing. The part that didn't know how to self-soothe might be in the shadow, and she gets to come back and be in relationship with us.
And as those parts of us are healed, you know, one of the things I like about myself is that I can hold a space, set a condition that feels safe for other people.
Yeah.
For clients as a professional, but also for friends, for people in my family. I'm someone that people tend to, of course not always, depends on them, maybe parts of me too, but tend to feel safe with and feel like they can trust. Of course I get told often, and you probably do too, wow, I just feel like I can tell you anything. Mm-hmm. Well, that's out of a part of my shadow that I've been able to reintegrate. Yeah. I'm someone that it could not self-soothe. Mm-hmm. Because I wasn't offered soothing when I needed it, right? And so because I was willing to do the work of looking at that and understanding that and seeing the places where it popped up and why, and having compassion and being able to reintegrate that part of me, part of the personality that I get to have today and a characteristic that I get to have today is out of that wound. It's out of that shadow piece of, okay, since I have been able to develop that for myself, I then can see and know, and without really any conscious effort, recognize how to offer that to other people. Yeah. The same thing with self-approval. And, you know, I talked about, you know, one of my earliest wounds when we first began this conversation was about feeling like a disappointment. Mm-hmm. And one of my gifts is being able to empower others. Mm. That's why I think I'm here on this planet. But it also came from a shadow part. It came from a feeling of I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I had to look at that. I had to do that work to create the healing, to be able to remind others, you are worthy, you are enough, you have purpose, and really mean that from an authentic place. It required doing that work. So I get why shadow work feels overwhelming and feels scary. And I also know how necessary it is and what a gift it is if we can allow ourselves the opportunity and really the privilege of being able to investigate some of those parts of ourselves that have been in our way. Those are also the way. They've then become the parts of ourselves that really allow us to experience true connection, true meaning.
Yes, yes, so well said. Yeah. I love what you said also about getting to be the sort of person who can, upon reintegrating a shadow part, a person who can be like more human, more of who you're meant to be, more in your passion, more in the flow of who Melody's meant to express herself as. Well, we have just a few minutes left, and I want to give you a chance to say anything else that might be on your mind or that you have found recently helpful in circles where you're teaching that you might think our listening audience could benefit from.
Such a good question. What's been on my mind lately? Truth. I've been thinking a lot about truth and our access to truth. I don't know, that seems really off topic, but it's just what I was just talking about all weekend. Satya, our availability to access what is divine. Mm-hmm. I feel like so often we get really caught up in the illusion of separation. Mm-hmm. And we don't have what Don Miguel Ruiz talks about in the Four Agreements as being impeccable speech. Mm-hmm. Because when we tell ourselves things like I mentioned earlier, I'm gross, I'm disgusting, I'm not good enough, I'm ugly, I don't have value, I'm not ready, I need more time, I need more experience before I have anything to offer, or whatever it is. I need my healing and my recovery to be perfect before I can offer anything to anyone outside of me. Any of these things that are negative. We actually are not living into the principle of satya and of truth. Because the truth is we are worthy. The truth is we are already ready. The truth is we all have meaning and we all have value and we all are essential. The truth is the namaste. We all already have light within us and can use that light to reflect to each other. And so I've been just really interested in that lately. Like, what are the ways that we actually block ourselves from accessing the truth that would help inform us how to find more connection and more meaning and more purpose in our lives? And I think it's by not being enough of a commitment, enough of a stalker of those kinds of internal negative critiques and interjects, and seeing underneath them that when I believe those kinds of things, when I don't stand in a gap you were talking about earlier, and I just acknowledge those things as being true about me, in so doing, I'm not only creating self-harm, I'm limiting myself to understanding the truth that the divine has for me, and that I could be in alignment and in the flow with, and therefore be of benefit to, not only to myself, but to those around me too. Mm-hmm. To me, that's so powerful. Like, okay, it's just another motivation to stay on top of, stay in inquiry about these things that are coming up inside of me. I get where they're from, or maybe I don't. It doesn't matter. I get that they're harming me. To stay in a relationship to them that's full of compassion, because it gives us more access to the possibility.
Mm-hmm. I love how you light up when you recognize that one of the motivating factors is you get to contribute more.
Yeah.
You get to give.
That's what it's about.
Yeah.
That's what it's about, right? When we can be a contribution, when we can be in the exchange. Somebody was asking me yesterday about service. I was like, I really feel like, my work with Embody Love Movement is the greatest gift to me. Mm-hmm. An exchange. It's not oh, you're welcome, I'm helping you, I have something to offer you, poor thing. It's not that at all. That's not the namaste. That's separation. And so when we get to be in contribution, it's like we get to feel embody the thread each of us have in the fabric of humanity. So we feel supported in that contribution. Mm-hmm. We feel our essentialness, and it allows us to feel the essentiality, the necessity of other people. So we're in this exchange of serving and being served, loving and being loved.
Yes. That's so how I feel teaching yoga in prison, just what you're saying. It's like, it's a contribution. There's a lot of reciprocity and mutuality. It's nourishing, it's enlivening, not draining at all.
Yeah. And that's how we know we're in the flow, right? We were saying that earlier. That's when we know we're supported. This isn't draining. Oh, this is energizing.
Okay. Thank you so much, Melody, for what you were saying about contribution and recognizing that it's actually
It causes expansion, not draining. It's something I think that everybody needs to hear as a person who's coming into herself or himself and not being held back by the addiction or the self-harm or self-condemnation, that we actually get to be a part of, contributing to a culture that's transformed too. We get to make the culture we want to live in.
Absolutely.
This is so essential.
Mm-hmm. We have agency. We have the privilege and the responsibility to work to create the kind of culture and the kind of world we want to live in. Absolutely.
We do. And thank you for the work that you do in Embody Love Movement. I'll be sure that our listeners know how to find you and be tuned into your work. Yeah.
That would be awesome. I feel strongly that those who have any sense of what it's like to sit in negative self-evaluation, to have been in the experience of being out of control, of eating, out of the illusion of control at least, of eating, or had negative body image, struggled with disordered eating, are absolutely the best at facilitating workshops for other people, at reminding other people of who they really are. But again, it's because of what we've been through that we have the gifts of helping and reminding others of the hope within them too.
Thank you. That was so beautifully said. Thank you very much. Wonderful to see you.
You too. Thank you for having me in the series, Sarahjoy.
You're welcome. Namaste.